Can I encourage everybody to come take their seats?
So, I really enjoyed your music. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So, do you have a card or a website or something?
I sent like an email.
Oh, cool.
You still have a few seconds to be unruly, but only a few seconds. Where's that other slide I like so much? Wendell, this is like the most organized crowd you've ever seen. At least I've ever seen. Thanks for sticking with us to the last part of the day, everybody. Just a little over 1 year ago, I think it was, on this very stage, the artist Jeremy Deller said to us, I went from being an artist who makes things to being an artist who makes things happen. And it's our honor this afternoon to bestow the Leonore Annenberg Prize for Art and Social Change to Rick Lowe, an artist who has made truly inspiring and meaningful things happen for people every single day. Rick, where are you? Hi, Rick. You got some fans here, Rick. Rick, this prize is named after a remarkable woman. Leonore Annenberg was one of the country's most generous patrons and vocal advocates for the arts and for education. Like you, she believed, and rightly so, that individual acts of goodness could reshape the world. And like you, she believed it is our duty to right that which is wrong. And like you, she used her personal abilities for profound good. So Rick, this prize is intended to honor an artist who has committed his or her life's work to promoting social justice in groundbreaking, profound, and important ways. We cannot think of a more worthy recipient than you. With that said, I swear you had a lot of competition. And I want to thank our prize jury, some of whom are here, some who are not. Michelle Coffey, Jeremy Deller, Dave Eggers, Charles Esche, Thelma Golden, Elizabeth Kabler, and Chus Martinez. We are also deeply grateful to the Annenberg Foundation and our dear trustee, Liz Kabler, who is following in the footsteps of her grandmother as a true citizen of our planet. Liz is going to join us on stage soon to present the prize to Rick, but a little bit later. Before then, I'm just curious, how many of you have heard of Project Row Houses? Please raise your hand. Pretty good. How many have been to Project Row Houses? Fantastic. Me too. So you all must go. You're going to hear more about it, but I just want to give you a little background just in case. In 1993, Rick found himself moved by the imminent demolition of several blocks of historic shotgun-style houses in Houston's northern 3rd Ward, one of the city's oldest African-American neighborhoods. He had a vision. He wanted to preserve its characteristic homes and provide essential services for its residents, it's the end of the day, such as housing for unwed teenage mothers and daycare opportunities so that the moms could go back to school and finish their high school education. He imagined healthcare centers. He imagined these families living and working side by side with artists in residence from around the world. He imagined vegetable gardens and classes and so much more. And fast forward to today, at one time in the beginning, Project Row Houses was just a little more than a city block. Today, it is over 40 renovated properties and is acclaimed as one of the most important neighborhood-based, ground-up, community-engaged art projects, proving that art and the community it creates can be a model for neighborhood revitalization, a forum for education, and a way to not only preserve but honor the fabric of a community. And I ask you, who better to introduce us to Rick than the deeply inspiring Wendell Pierce? You know Wendell as the acclaimed yes, woo, Wendell. You know Wendell as the acclaimed actor who has worked with such directors as Woody Allen and Spike Lee, to name drop just a few people. He is practically idolized. Actually, he is literally idolized in our family and in our staff for his portrayal of Bunk on 5 acclaimed seasons of The Wire. Yep. But some of us know him as a true citizen of New Orleans, deeply committed to its rebuilding. We at Creative Time first met Wendell when Creative Time was producing Paul Chan's Waiting for Godot in New Orleans' Lower Ninth Ward and Gentilly neighborhoods in 2007. For as long as I live, I will never forget his deeply moving and generous performance. And I suspect, though he may not be able to say so, that it was during this time period that the seeds for HBO's newest hit show, Treme, may have been sown. Again, in this show, as he did in Waiting for Godot, he makes palpable the heartbreak and horror, the honor, the longing, and the love, and even the humor in rebuilding life in post-Katrina New Orleans. And like our honoree, Wendell's commitment goes beyond the spiritual rebuilding of community and right into the hard labor of physically rebuilding its neighborhoods. His work with his childhood neighborhood of Pontchartrain Park was featured on CNN just weeks ago, as Wendell is leading the charge to build 350 affordable and environmentally sound homes, which will preserve the community character and honor its rich history. Yeah. I want you to know that Wendell Pierce is dedicated to both his art and his community. He is a force in front of the camera and behind the scenes, and it is my honor to welcome Wendell Pierce to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very kind and generous of you. And I'm honored to be here, especially reuniting with Creative Time in that very special moment that we created in New Orleans, which is still resonating today when we did Waiting for Godot. People in New Orleans are still waiting for that euphemistically superior person who's supposed to come and clean things up, that imaginary Godot who never comes. But we know that we have it within ourselves to do it ourselves, and that's the spirit that you see in the work that's being done in New Orleans. So Creative Time, thank you for having me here today. It's an honor. And thank you, Ann. It's good to see you again. It's an honor to stand here on this hallowed stage where so many important Americans engaged in the important public discourse of their time. You can't help but feel the very presence of Lincoln as he began his journey to American icon. But I will try to be brief so we can get to Mr. Lowe. But you know, they elected a brother as president, and whenever you give us an open mic, you never can tell. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here among you. It's a pleasure to be able to come here before you and tell you about some of the work that we're doing in New Orleans. And it's a particular pleasure to introduce to you the winner of the 2010 Leonore Annenberg Prize for Art and Social Change. I was struck by the title of your conference, Revolutions in Practice. Not revolution, but revolutions. Now, I'm sure the organizers were referring to the number of artists who are represented here and to the varied nature of their work. But I thought about the revolution that we all experienced 2 years ago, this month, in fact, and the fact that we apparently need recurring revolutions to bring about tangible change for the people who most need it in this country. Revolutions in practice. If I sound a little upset, it's only because I am. In the more colloquial vernacular, I'm actually a little pissed off. We live in a dynamic, exciting, historic time, yet many seem not to recognize it or are determined to take us back to a more negative time and place. We live in an age of abundance, yet more people than ever are struggling to make ends meet, to keep a roof over their head, and to send their children to decent schools. I feel like the narrator in Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, who famously observed that it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. We elected a black man president in one of the proudest moments of my life, and 2 years later, pundits talk about an enthusiasm gap because so many of his supporters are disappointed in him. Disappointed? After 8 years of George Bush, some of us are disappointed. Now, don't get me wrong, I get mad at our presidents for a number of reasons. When his administration bends over backwards to appease independent white voters who are constantly looking for a reason not to support him, and will no doubt find one no matter what he does. When he doesn't make the arts and artists a priority despite their critical role in our society and despite their importance in bad economic times. But wanting different decisions on specific issues is very different from being disappointed to the degree that I wouldn't support his agenda and the party that's trying to execute that agenda. I'm frustrated because I want him to succeed, and we all need him to succeed. But he doesn't get the recognition he deserves for historic recognition he deserves for historic victories in reforming health care, revolutions in practice, saving our financial system, no matter what you think of that. It's revolution in practice. Or getting the troops out of Iraq, a revolution in practice. Any of these would have been sufficient, would have had people singing the praises of Bush or even Clinton, but we have an enthusiasm gap with this president. I feel torn because I understand what he must feel sometimes. You see, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote about that dual existence that African Americans experience, saying, "It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder." Now, this dual lens on oneself and the world plays out in many ways. For instance, I was so thankful and heartened by the outpouring of support to my hometown of New Orleans post-Katrina and the response I've personally received to my efforts there. Yet I am frustrated beyond belief at the barriers that have been placed in our way by some of the same people who don't want to see Obama succeed. Some of you may know that I'm leading a grassroots effort to rebuild a historic neighborhood in New Orleans, my beloved Pontchartrain Park, the only neighborhood where blacks could purchase a home in post-World War II segregated New Orleans. This is an important middle-class black neighborhood that has produced the likes of Lisa Jackson, the head of the EPA, Terrence Blanchard, the Grammy Award-winning acclaimed jazz trumpeter and film composer, Mark Morial, the former mayor and the president of the National Urban League today, and many, many others such as myself. These residents have engaged in the purest form of democracy by exercising the right of self-determination and rebuilding their community on their own. Now, I won't go on into the details of their struggle, but I will tell you that after 2 years of raising money, fighting off speculators, negotiating city, state, and federal bureaucracies, rebuffing naysayers, rallying citizens, resisting despair, and being recognized and honored across the country for all of this work, we now have 111 pre-qualified home buyers ready to move home. And yet, the subsidies promised are inaccessible because they are still being unnecessarily renegotiated and have delayed the closings for these hundreds of folks. This is in a context where there is still $3 billion earmarked dollars to rebuild and repopulate New Orleans sitting unspent. $3 billion over 5 years sitting unspent. I'm proud of the work, but I'm angry and frustrated because while many celebrate the positive changes that have occurred in the 5 years after Katrina, the only public work at scale, the only public work of scale that has been completed in New Orleans is the demolition of almost all public housing structures, continuing to displace the working poor who desperately want to move home as well. Now, this would disgust even Mr. Peter Cooper, the very man who built this university so that the poor of New York would have access to an education of architecture, engineering, and fine arts. But I don't give up and I don't give in, partly because I'm encouraged and inspired by the work of people like this man here, this year's Annenberg Prize winner, Mr. Rick Lowe. I believe that one of the roles of art is to awaken and enlighten us, to fire our imaginations, and to inspire our work. In New Orleans, we have gone further and developed tangible, sustainable solutions, and in our sister city of Houston, home to thousands of displaced New Orleanians, Rick Lowe has done the same thing. In 1993, moved by the imminent demolition of several blocks of shotgun-style houses in Houston's North 3rd Ward, one of the city's oldest African-American communities, Rick Lowe came up with a plan to preserve the neighborhood's historic homes and provide essential services for its residents. Called Project Row Houses, it has become one of the most important neighborhood-based community-engaged art projects in the world. Project Row Houses has been the catalyst for the creation of homes for single mothers and their children, residency spaces for artists like us, to create new work with the local community, community gardens, health centers, and much more. Originally occupying a group of 22 houses covering 1.5 city blocks, Project Row Houses has grown to include over 40 renovated properties containing exhibition spaces, a literary center, a multimedia, performance, art space, offices, low-income housing, and other amenities. Project Row Houses emerged out of discussions with African-American artists who wanted to establish a positive creative presence in their own community. To this day, it carries on this vision, proving that art and the community it creates can be the foundation for revitalizing depressed inner-city neighborhoods. Rick was inspired by the principles of renowned artist John Biggers, the late African-American muralist who painted black neighborhoods of shotgun houses like the ones on Holman Street and showed them to be places of pride and community, not poverty and crime, pride and community. Biggers spoke of art as a way to create an effective community, and Rick has done just that. The project seeks to integrate art into the fabric of everyday life and is at once a space for producing and celebrating culture, a model for community revitalization, a forum for education, and a way to preserve the architecture and history of a neighborhood. His groundbreaking vision and long-term commitment to this community has been influential worldwide. He was a Loeb Fellow at the Harvard School of Design, and in 2002 won the Heinz Award in Arts and Humanities. In 2010, he was an artist in residence at the Otis College of Art and Design and received a Distinguished Artist Award for Lifetime Achievement from the College Art Association. Michael Kimmelman wrote in the New York Times that his work may be the most impressive and visionary public art project in the country. After getting Project Real Houses off the ground, Rick went to LA and incubated a similar project. Most recently, he helped initiate Transformer projects, an attempt to aid New Orleans' comeback from Hurricane Katrina. Rick continues to live in Houston and has directly impacted the lives of hundreds of residents of his community and influenced countless other artists, writers, social service providers, and the occasional actor and community organizer in New Orleans. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating the 2010 Leonore Annenberg Prize for Art and Social Change, given to the one and the only Mr. Rick Lowe. Rick Lowe.
There is a colorful sign hanging on one of the leafy blocks near West 11th Street that says, "If we all do one act of kindness daily, we just might set the world in the right direction." Today I feel like we are supporting an authentic and meaningful artistic practice, an art movement that does not conform itself to grand gestures or art world politics, becoming mired in lots of praise but little actual positive outcome. Rick, your work is real. It is authentic, and your solutions to very painful and contemporary problems run deep, embedded in the bricks of buildings, roots of trees, and veins of people. Your belief that art and the community it creates can revitalize depressed inner-city neighborhoods has continually come to fruition in the fabric of life for people living in Houston's Third Ward. My grandmother, Leonore Annenberg, would have understood your work completely. And I feel humbled and quite moved to be able to uphold her vision and honor her memory. I want to thank Creative Time and the wonderful team who championed Rick for this prize, and especially Ann Pasternak, who continually is an inspiration and one of the biggest supporters of artists who have integrity, talent, and vision, attributes Anne has herself. Rick, thank you for accepting this award. It is an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we need to hold this for a picture? Whoa, it's heavy.
I know.
All right. Where to start? I think we better start by setting the timer back there, though, because I always say that I'm going to be brief, but you just never know. So whoever is doing the timer, really, if you would click it for me. Well, first of all, I just have to start out by thanking the Annenberg Foundation for supporting this award and all the great introductions, and thank Creative Time for having the vision and the insight to know that there are people like myself and you in the audience that are engaged in work that is going to be the work of the future, I think, for artists. And so it's very nice to have Creative Time taking the lead in terms of kind of getting the ball rolling. It's just very good, so thank you very much. Now, for other little things before I get started, when Anne was up introducing Wendell, and she was talking about all these things that he's done, like The Wire and all that stuff. Is Wendell still here? I don't know if he's still here, but anyway. But when I mentioned back home in Houston in 3rd Ward that, Wendell Pierce is going to be the person that's going to introduce this thing, and they go, oh my God, he was that guy in Waiting For, and I was going like, they know about Waiting for Godot, and then as they went like, Waiting to Exhale. I was like, yeah, that's him. I was going to be really shocked if they knew about the Waiting for Godot piece, but anyway. Oops, did I do that? Okay. And so the other thing I'll say is that I wrote this presentation here, but a couple things kind of made me kind of shift my thinking on using this because, well, first of all, if I could read this like Wendell can, I would, but I can't, so I'm not even going to try. And then secondly, several people came up to me and asked me, like, God, are you going to read? Because it's late in the day. Folks, it's a little late in the day, so I don't think people are ready for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try this. I'm going to just try to just talk these points through. I might have to look through it a little bit and stumble around a little bit. But anyway, so okay. When I start thinking about this award, and what it means, I first of all I was thinking about the title of it, the Annenberg Prize for Art and Social Change. And, that was the first thing that got me to start thinking. And I'm going to give you a little context behind what I'm going to say, is that the work that I do, the life that I live, and I feel privileged that I get to do this, but I get to interact and call friends, associates, colleagues, people that come from all walks of life. I mean, it's pretty amazing, from the most radical on the right to the radical on the left and everything in between, and I'm stimulated by that. It doesn't, of course I love the times when I can sit around and talk to people about things that we share in common, but I also find that I grow a lot when I'm, talking to people that have different points of view. But one of the things that I've noticed over the last couple of years or so is how language is kind of shifting a little bit. And how we talk about things, the clarity is kind of missing a little bit now. And the reason I started to think about that was in relation to the title of this award, the Annenberg Prize for Social Change. You know, I'm a big person for change, you know, and I think it's important. But to me, change is not just for change's sake. It has to have an objective. And to me, coming out of an activist background, the notion of change to me has to be attached to justice. And so when I thought about that, I said, I wonder if I could bring that up at this talk. So I emailed Anne, and I said, Anne, so why did you guys name the prize, you know, a prize for art and social change as opposed to for art and social justice? And I was very relieved that she said, well, you know, we didn't really focus on that very much, but if you want to talk about that, go right ahead. And so, and I was glad for that, because what I really do want to talk about and want to connect my talk and the work at Project Row Houses to is the idea and the notion of justice. You know, in these conversations that I hear, you know, from time to time, and this whole thing about how language is getting a little confused now, it used to be that you could use the word change, and particularly with Obama, you know, popularizing the word change, we automatically assumed that it meant something that was, you know, had a progressive agenda. Not anymore. You know, I mean, we're living at a time now where, you know, conservatives are saying they want change. You know, and so just to say change is not enough. You know, and I start looking at even more about how the language kind of shifts over time. And, you know, in the spirit of kind of listening and knowing the world from different perspectives, I often watch and listen to Fox News. And a week or so ago, I was listening, and and this whole notion about language and how malleable it is and how it shifts and changes. There was a young conservative activist who she used the word well, she said that she was a creative extremist. And then after that, she very eloquently quoted Martin Luther King from his letter from the Birmingham jail, in which he said that the world is in dire need of creative extremists. Now, the notion of creative extremists from Martin Luther King was one that was rooted in the struggle of love and justice. And the agenda that this woman was putting forth was one, to me, that was of trickery. And so the notion of the language and what we do with the language and why it's important is that we can't any longer expect that there's clarity or there's that any one group owns the issues around justice or the issues around progressive or is this thing just going? Because it shouldn't be. It should be. I don't know what happened. Anyway, so this notion about, I mean, we can't just, assume that anybody owns, this language. Because the truth of the matter is right now, I mean, artists are working with media now. I mean, artists from all walks of life. It's not the old days when, artists were the people that went off and went to art school and hung around in their little progressive groups or whatever. I mean, artists are creative people, and they're creative people from all walks of life, all sides. And so I'm not trying to suggest that it's important that we, shift our thinking and start to talk about social justice as opposed to, social change. But, I do think that we have to be clear. We need, with the way that language is now, we have to be clear about what we mean. Now, Project Row Houses for me has always been, it is rooted in this idea of social change. But the question that I often ask myself is, how does Project Row Houses give effect to social justice? And the thing that I started to think about in preparation for this talk was how I think the key thing that Project Row Houses does in terms of social justice is we try to honor a place for what it is. And in the process of honoring a place, you give a sense of dignity to that place. And with dignity, then a place can sustain itself and continue to perpetuate the honor that it deserves and really put itself in a position where it can have a fair relationship within the broader context. So I would show you a few images here. And when I start with this image here, this is a neighborhood of Project Row Houses. This is the kind of housing that people live in, and this is the kind of place, the street that they have to walk down daily. It's their life. It's their neighborhood. But how can you find dignity in such environment? It's extremely difficult. And these are the houses that later became Project Row Houses. And the reason that they were able to make that leap, I give a lot of credit to this artist, John Biggers. And the credit that I give Biggers is one of teaching me something about dignity, in that it's not on the surface, and sometimes it's a possibility. And what Biggers did was to take something that we had dishonored, an architectural type, a community, low-income communities in general, that we've, I don't know why it keeps going forward, but for low-income communities in general, we've dishonored those communities. And can we take this thing off automatic? Because it keeps moving ahead of me. Anyway, so Biggers was able to kind of let me know this, that it's beneath the surface. You can find things. He himself went to the root of, or the origin of the shotgun house, and found the dignity of these houses not in the presence that they were in the slides that I showed earlier, but in the history, the stories, the role that those houses played as a vessel and a vehicle for community to move through and spread throughout the country and to become artists of this nation, to even become the kind of houses that held the basis for our current president. As black people, whether it's West Africa or in the United States, these little houses represent a certain kind of community and lifestyle that nurtured and support people in times of need, in times of growth. And so Biggers kind of taught me that and got me on my way. Now, another side, though, that was interesting for me was Joseph Boyes. So Joseph Boyes' role in this project was simply language. I've never connected with his work. Not really. But his language, the term social sculpture, it kind of set off a light for me. It gave me a formal approach to addressing the work that I wanted to do. But let me go back and just kind of give you where the content of this work came from, though. And that came from, as someone in the introduction said earlier, that I used to hang out with a group of artists. There were 7 of us hanging out, and we're all African-American artists. And one day we were having a conversation about, what's going on in the African-American community. And we tried to place ourselves within what's going on there, and we couldn't. Most of us were doing things at alternative spaces or galleries and museums roundabout, but none of us were actually engaged or were a resource to the African American community. And so we started asking questions like, why is it that we're resources to galleries and museums around the city, but not to our own community? Why is all the resources intended to support African American communities that they always go through some intermediary? Why is it that inner city, predominantly black communities are void of any kind of investment? And with those questions before us, we decided that we would invest ourselves. And we would find a way to at least make ourselves a resource in investment in that community. And that was the content of what brought about this idea of Project Row Houses. And so you couple that with the Joseph Beuys notion of social sculpture, and then we had something to work with. Now, going back to John Biggers, though, one of the things that I learned from him and looking at his work, studying his work, talking to him, was, I learned about what it means to build a community. What are the elements of a community? What's important? Well, there were basically 4 areas that Biggers talked about being important: architecture, art creativity, education, and a social safety net. And so in our process of working on this project, the first thing that we charged ourselves with doing was to honor this architecture, to give the architecture dignity again, to figure out how we could make this place a place that knew of its value, not based on what it looked like before, but what the potential and the possibilities of it could be. And as you can see in these slides here, the architecture, we approach it multiple ways. One, of course, is renovating buildings, but the other is building new buildings and trying to figure out how to make those things work together. There's also a process of looking at not just housing, but there are also commercial buildings that are part of the neighborhood, that holds the scale, that maintains the scale of the neighborhood. Because one of the things that the whole process that we all hear about all the time, gentrification, there's this notion of scale, of what happens to a place when it loses its scale. The possibility the floodgates are open for it to lose its whole historical context. And so for us, it's very important to try to hold on to the scale. And then to take not just the architecture as an isolated thing, but to think about how that architecture served the goal of elevating how people think and feel about being in this neighborhood. It's for the people that are living in the neighborhood, but it's also for people that come from outside of the neighborhood. So we have to constantly kind of work the balance between private neighborhood inside, but also public opportunities for people from outside to come and understand our neighborhood. Dealing with vacant land, how do we honor our place by just cleaning it up and making positive use of the space that's around us? Education was the other thing that John Biggers talked about. And we talk about the crisis in education, but if you think about the way that so many of these neighborhoods, like Project Row Houses around the country, around the world, where people have to live in the conditions that I've talked about early on, it is hard for them to find a space within themselves to understand and appreciate the value that they have inside of them. The dignity of understanding what it means to be able to achieve and accomplish in terms of education, it disappears. So we set out to provide an opportunity for a group of people within our neighborhood to work with artists, to work within our community, to kind of help them figure out how to see themselves as potential participants and to see themselves at the highest level and the highest potential that's available. Now, one of the ways that we do that is, there's formal programs, but there's also the idea of mentorship. And because that's one of the most powerful ways. I mean, you can put people in classes and stuff, but once there's this opportunity of networking, connecting with others, that's an incredibly powerful opportunity for upward mobility and self-esteem building for the people that are that we're working with. Now, time and time again, a lot of these kids in these neighborhoods are basically throwaways, right? But I would challenge people, who think that they are throwaways, through the experience of Project Row Houses, to think about this idea that, I don't know if she's here right now, but there's a young woman named Frances Olajide who grew up at Project Row Houses in the education program, who's now a teacher here in New York City. Miles Rodriguez, a young man who basically, when he was in the 9th grade, we were having philosophy classes reading Aristotle, but he was failing in school because he couldn't quite figure out how to make that connection in the formal educational environment until we were able to give him support and help. Now Miles Rodriguez just finished his PhD at Harvard in history. There are people that I could just name this, and you ask, where is the dignity in neglect? There is none. If you give people a chance, they can show you who they really are and shine as bright as anybody else. And thank you, Frances, for coming. Housing. And most of these things we've been doing as ways to just kind of symbolically suggest how we can do things better. When you take someone who has never lived in a place that had any kind of organized structure around it, chaos completely, overcrowdedness, and so on and so forth, there's no dignity in that. It's hard for them to imagine becoming the person that they are inside in those conditions. So we've worked really hard with our housing program to try to figure out how we elevate these little tiny shotgun houses in 3rd Ward that sit on the street, that sometimes the paint gets a little scuffy or whatever, but inside of them we try to make it something that elevates the standings of what a person would feel like when they live there. And so you have these young women that come in, they come into this thing, and the idea is to paint a picture for them of saying, this is you. This house represents nothing beyond who you are inside of yourself. And we challenge them. We challenge them to live up to that. And so there's, to build this kind of, to restore something that people have never had or have struggled to have is a challenge. It's a tough challenge. So we have to have many strategies to do it. This particular program, there's networking situations that people, that the young mothers have put in all the time. Their children have worked with, their counseling and all that kind of stuff. But let me give you another couple of examples of throwaways, right? And unfortunately, she's in the city, but she's not here. She was with me last night at the dinner. But this woman in the foreground here, Asada. Asada is a young woman who, she basically showed up at Project Row Houses saying that, she had given up. She had no, I wish she was here because she could tell you this story much better than I can. But, she had basically, reached the point where she didn't think that she had nothing to offer. And she stepped into this program with these other young mothers and this whole network of people, and it was amazing how she flowered. This, I think I might have turned it off. Nope. So this woman, who was on academic probation at University of Houston, didn't think she would ever go back to school. And once she got into this program in the support network, she put it all together and did so well that she ended up getting a full scholarship to a PhD program at Penn State, in which she completed in 5 years. Went on to teach at the University of Pittsburgh for 4 years, and has found her way back to Project Row Houses as a mentor and a counselor for the young mothers that are coming through now. Asada is but one of the people that have kind of fought through and regained the dignity that they were born with, but had been pulled away from them over time. In fact, Asada is such a great voice on the power of being in this project, that actually when Tom Finkelpearl wrote his book, Dialogues in Public Art, he asked to talk to someone who was a part of Project Row Houses that had benefited from it. And he talked to Asada, and I'm assuming she was so impressive that she ended up having a chapter in that book. So if those of you who want to know more about her, you can check out that book. But there are many other women that have gone through this project and done great, great things. Now, so then there's this question about art, creativity, and culture. That's one of the things that's been crucial to the building of this community. Because as someone said in the last panel, that it's important to be able to reflect and to be able to have the work that we do, to be critical of it, to think about it, and have people kind of look into it in different ways. And that's the thing that I think having this kind of arts-centered activity to what we do, that's where its meaning comes from. So I'm going to show you just a few examples of how people have been able to impact in different ways. So from the more basic standpoint, people like Julie Moretu, who is dealing strictly with kind of more an aesthetic impact. People like Whitfield Lavelle, who start to help us understand the stories and the lives of people within our neighborhood by gathering that information and internalizing it in its own way and sending it back out to the community. Tracy Hicks helped us start our Third Ward Archive. Lynn McCabe, who actually started a program of figuring out how to extend the circle, the network, and the resources for these young mothers through dinners that were held in her house that she worked in. Rashida Bumbry, who, after Hurricane Katrina, dedicated a house for this opportunity for residents from New Orleans to have a place they could come and practice the rituals that they were accustomed to. And Sherman Fleming, who came to Houston right after Hurricane Ike, in which Project Row Houses was damaged during that time, and we were planning to postpone the opening, but they decided to take it on and to start looking at how they could utilize the devastation and generate conversation around this. And Elia Arce, Greenhouse Collective, that grew out of this, in which added to the organization of our gardening project, and also creating the opportunity for this gardening project to extend and move outside of Project Row Houses directly into broader areas in which people could take plants from the inside and move them further. And even more political kinds of gestures, and this is Andrea Bowers, who challenges us at this time. This is a quote from Obama in 2006, and so she wants us to reflect on this. And even artists that Jane Jennings and Karen Atkinson, who helped us try to figure out how to do a mapping process, which we could kind of look deeper at our expansion outside of the immediate neighborhood. And so I also say this thing about, the idea of the dignity, even the dignity of artists. I mean, where's the dignity when we tell artists that there's no room for them to play a role in changing people's lives in real communities? I mean, why is it that we have to allocate our creativity to a world that's not connected to many of the things that we grew up with or that we live around on a daily basis? To me, there's no dignity in that. But the dignity for me is when, people move through Project Row Houses and they go on their way, but many of them, they find their way back. And I'm very excited that tomorrow you'll be hearing from Oda Benga-Jones and Associates, who have been a big part of Project Row Houses for many years, and they're back. They move out of our community, but they always come back. And so I'm going to close on these couple of slides, two more slides. I'm going to show you two things that I showed last year. And also, I'm going to put it into context of what NATO talked about, how the question of whether, the questions around how long should an artist be involved with a project. I mean, I don't think there's any answer because, people do things the way that they find fit in the way that's necessary. But one of the advantages of long-term involvement is, for me, with Project Row Houses, it's been a laboratory that I've been able to, that's been created, that allows me to continue to have insight and to explore into things that are going on there. And I'm showing these two projects, this particular one and the next one, for a particular reason I'll tell you later. But the idea behind this was to figure out if I could just do something with individuals that we did with Project Row Houses. I mean, we found a way to find the dignity in these little houses and watch the impact that it could have as it grew. And so I knew all these people in the neighborhood that once you get to know them and you get to spend time with them, you start to see the seeds of this dignity that they have about themselves and how they fit within our community. And so I wanted to try to honor them and to elevate them, to celebrate them in some way, as a way of hopefully giving them back something that they might have lost. This is, the first one was Benjamin Benson. This is Eugene Howard, calls himself brother-in-law. This man showed up at Project Row Houses in around 2000. Had been in prison for many years. And, no education, no family that could really kind of, work with him. So he just showed up at Project Row Houses. And over time, I started to talk to him about what his vision was with his life and what would he like to see happen and all this stuff. And one of the things he told me about was that he always wished and dreamed that he could have a cafe. And so my goal was to figure out, how to do a portrait of this guy, brother-in-law, in a way that's not static, but in a way that it's an effort. It's an ongoing effort to figure out how to take this guy's dream and have that dream help move our organization in a direction of something that we need, which was food services within our neighborhood, but at the same time attaching it and honoring him. Now, he, it was really interesting because these two individuals, as well as the other two that I'm not showing, I could see the growth in them as individuals. Brother-in-law, in particular, has become this person that, and Robert Pruitt knows this, who's who also works with brother-in-law and kind of keeps him. We're all trying to usher in something about these characters that we know they have, but it's been lost. So, so I've been working with this guy for 10 years, but how can you replace something in 10 years that's taken, 50 years of decay? So, and I'm sharing this, and I'm telling this story because, as I speak right now, brother-in-law is in prison. He, someone like him who is you can see it in his smile. This is a lovely person, right? A lot of hard luck. He was out on parole, and with a new life, though. A new life around Project Row Houses, a new life as the brother-in-law character and all this stuff, and just really living a good life. But at one moment, he flashed back to what he was accustomed to. Someone challenged his manhood, and he took him up on it. All he had was just a Class C misdemeanor, which could possibly send him back to prison until 2019. So, the work that I do, it's I have to think of it in terms of social justice. Change is not enough. The thing about the notion of social justice, for me, within the communities that I work in, it's not that difficult. It's really just trying to peel back the layers of things that are already there. And once you can peel that back, you almost set the start of something that can move on continuously on its own. But I show you these last slides, though, because I also wanted to not have you leave here with the notion and understanding that it's easy and that it all works. This is not easy work. And it's also dangerous work. And it's something that I think that, we should have fun, and it's fun work. But at the same time, I'm very aware of the fact that, these are lives that, I'm tampering with. And so to keep myself clear on it, I try to not take too much responsibility for the lives, because I can't. But what I think that Project Row Houses does, and I try to do in my own way, is, try to kind of create an illustration or illustrate a path through which people can find their own way. If they can find their dignity, then that sets them on a path in which they'll get the justice that they deserve. Now, oftentimes, in order to do this, it gets a little tricky. As a friend of mine introduced this term to me a few weeks ago, the notion of trespassing. As an artist who work in the field of architecture, who's not an architect, education, I'm not an educator, social service, I'm not that, you have to trespass. You have to trespass into these areas, and you have to trust yourself that you can be responsible enough to know how to do that in a responsible way. And so I think I should probably wind this up. But what I want, I'm going to end with this thing that really, really, really is dear to me and deep for me, and it's the most important thing in the world to me. That this idea of change, that we all want it, everybody wants it, nobody wants it, and it's going to happen anyway. But you know what? At the end of change, to me, it has to be justice. That's the thing that we have to demand of ourselves and all the people around us, whether they're on the right or on the left. Let's make it about justice. Thank you.
So, on that note, very powerful note, amazing Rick Lowe. Thank you everybody for coming. We're starting tomorrow at 10 for those of you coming. And thank you to you too. Thanks so much.